Okay, so I thought we'd do a brief history of each railroad and see what's happened over the time. Okay, so I thought we'd do a brief history of each railroad from 1950 and just kind of look at it and see what and see what's happened over the time. So first one alphabetically is the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to look in a little bit more detail at the components that were there in 1950. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe.
This is before the war, when the General Motors tested the 103 was their their 4-unit, 4,500 horsepower, 4 FTs, 1,350 horse each, 16-cylinder. They tested it around the country, and the railroads couldn't believe how reliable it was. And the Santa Fe was just amazed that they could put the thing on a train in Chicago and run it all the way to Los Angeles and back. They did have some mechanical equipment and everything, and later on they automated more of it, but they were extremely reliable, and so they bought 350 of them. Why? Because they go for very dry areas, and they had to haul water into those areas, as we talked about with the steam locomotive. So all of a sudden this alleviated that need, and they could run, and so the Santa Fe was extremely happy with them. So here's a side view of a picture off the internet. Well, then they went to the F7s, and they bought a lot of F7, F3s, and F7. These are 1,500 horsepower, 16-cylinder, and they bought a bunch of them because they also found that the E units had the horsepower, but they didn't have the tractive effort. And places like Cajon Pass and some of these other places, Glorieta Pass and Raton in New Mexico, they had trouble. So they put lots of F units together. This is a picture I took in the 1969. It's the combined. It's the Chief or one of those trains like that, or El Capitan combined train. It has 5 F7s, and it's they had to use these F units or quite a few of them, because here we are in Raton Pass. This is over 3%. And that's why eventually this became just a track for passenger trains and locals, because trying to run big heavy freights over this line was really difficult. Both going up and going down. Here's the train coming down in Raton, 1970, and this is the combined Santa Fe Chief and El Capitan at that time. Here it is pulling into the depot. And this is in Pueblo, Colorado, same time. These are F7 freight units and a GP9. They bought a bunch of those, and you can start to see passenger units showing up in freight train service because they had reduced the number of passenger trains. They'd also bought these, like the Great Northern. The Santa Fe wanted to go to higher horsepower units and run fewer units. So General Electric, when they designed the 6-axle units, here's the air intake. So the unit basically starts here. Here's the generator, the engine, the fan, and the radiator. Here's the dynamic brakes in there, but they left a space in here for because this is the mid-60s. They're still running passenger trains, and so they put steam. They had room for a big steam generator right there behind the cab. And so these are the U28CG, and the G is for generator. And so Santa Fe bought some of these, and I believe the National de Mexico bought some as well. And here's a picture. I took this at Argentine in Kansas, back going into the shop for routine maintenance. Later on, you can see here's the 28CG, and here's the U30CGCB. C for 6 axles, G for generator, CB for car body. Some of the people think it's probably not the most attractive unit ever built, but everybody to each his own. They ran them for a while, and obviously here's the side view. They're pretty good units. General Electric still had some work to do, but in another 20 years, they would pass General Motors up for in terms of unit sales when they came out with the Dash 840C. That was the unit that all of a sudden was so reliable and low cost, simple, but reliable and effective that it overtook General Motors. And of course, the rest is history. Now, the most common unit in the country is the 44 and AC 44. So Santa Fe then, when General Motors came out with the SD 45, they bought the FP 45. And so this is a longer underframe, same as the SD 45 inside, 3,600 horsepower, 20 cylinder, a 645 cubic inch per cylinder per power assembly, and the steam generators. And they would put these, instead of running 5 or 6 F units, they'd put a couple of these on the train, and they were very happy with them. And here's a side of the unit. Santa Fe really tried to run good passenger trains right up to the end, and they would, when they got dirty, they would spray silver paint on the side because they wanted them to look nice. And I mean, they kept a really good passenger service right to the end. Here this is 1970 in middle of Illinois, and you can see they're probably after Amtrak, 1971, they are moving some of the passenger units into freight service. So here's a couple of the U-28Cs leading a group of trains. Now only a few, because they had automatic train on shoes on this thing for cabinet signals and train control. So only a few units had that. That's the U-28CGs, the U-25Bs, the GP-20s, and the F-7s and the FP-45s were the only ones that had that. So all the trains were led by one of those units. Now here's a string of F units at Argentine and Kansas City. Standard F units, they had a bunch of these, and they ran them a long time. And then later, they converted them into GP9 like units. They converted some 300 of them at their Cleburne shops in Texas. And those units were extremely effective because they converted old GP9s and F units, and many of them are still running around on short lines and industrial units and grain elevators. You'll still see them all over the place. The CF7, Cleburne F7. Santa Fe also bought a lot of GP9s, and they ran so many that, like the Pennsylvania and like the Union Pacific, they bought B units. So this is a GP9B. And later the railroads, every now and then they toy with these things. The UP had other units. The Burlington Northern actually bought a whole bunch of U30Bs that were cabless, and they ran those for quite a while. They were quite successful, but it does lead to problems when the dispatcher looks outside and he only sees B units. That can be a problem. So here's the GP-20, and I think this shoe is back here that for the train control, ATC. And here's the GP-30, and then another GP-20, and this is at Corwith in Chicago. And here's a train on the line going to Kansas City in Illinois. And of course it has a GP 20 in the lead, and then a GP 35 and on. The Santa Fe was also buying when the PAs, the Santa Fe bought the DL600B. This is at Argentine in Kansas City. It was 2,400 horsepower, and you can see why they were nicknamed the Alligator for obvious reasons. Again, they had the same problem that the Alco PA did, that the engine was not tested. The diesel engine was not fully tested when they put it out, and they ran, as Jim Boyd pointed out, 3-4 years, and then all of a sudden they had a lot of crankshaft and other problems. Here's a typical freight in the 60s: GP30, GP35, 35, and a lot of BB units. And they ran a lot of units, like the Union Pacific, they had to run a lot of freight, and so they had to keep the speed up. Here's another train in Illinois, U25B, and a bunch of GP20s and maybe a GP35 back here. A lot of units. They'd run a lot of units. Now, of course, like the Great Northern and many other railroads, when the General Motors came out with the 20-cylinder, 3,600 horsepower unit, all of a sudden railroads started to think, this is pretty good. We've got 3,600 horsepower. We've got lots of tractive effort. We should buy some of these. And So the Santa Fe bought a bunch, Great Northern bought a bunch, UP bought some, but some of the railroads bought a lot. Chicago Northwestern bought 70 of them, and with no dynamics, that's kind of an oddball. But anyway, the Santa Fe bought a bunch of these, and they bought the F45. We saw the FP45. This is the F45, a little shorter back here, no steam generator, but it has the cab unit. General Motor or Great Northern bought these from General Motors as well. Here's the back end, pretty plain back end. They do have a headlight and there's a door, but that's pretty basic. And here's a typical freight when they were starting to get into the CCs, the 6-axle units. This is an SD40-2 and a SD24 and a U30C. So they're running 3 CC units rather than all the and this ran pretty much like this until the merger with the BN. And so we'll be talking about the BNSF later on.